In August 1901, two English women, Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, embarked on a trip to France that would lead them into one of the most mysterious experiences of the 20th century. The women were academics. Moberly was the principal of St. Hugh's College in Oxford, and Jourdain was her assistant. Their visit to France included a trip to the Palace of Versailles, a site steeped in history and known for its association with the French monarchy, especially the ill-fated Marie Antoinette. On August the 10th, after exploring the main palace, Moberly and Jourdain decided to visit Le Petit Trianon, a small chateau on the grounds where Marie Antoinette had once sought refuge from the formality of court life. However, as they walked through the gardens to find the chateau, they quickly became disoriented. The path seemed strangely deserted, and the atmosphere grew unnervingly quiet, almost oppressive. The air felt heavy, and they noticed a peculiar change in their surroundings. The landscape appeared oddly lifeless, and the trees seemed frozen, devoid of the usual rustling of leaves. As they wandered, they encountered a series of unusual figures who seemed out of place, dressed in antiquated clothing. They first saw two men in long coats and tricorn hats who directed them further down the path. Moberly noted that the men had an unpleasant appearance, with faces that were somewhat unnatural. Continuing on, they passed a woman and a girl, both of whom were also dressed in old-fashioned attire. Then they came across a man sitting on a low bridge, whom Moberly described as wearing a large shady hat and a dark cloak. His face was pockmarked and unpleasant, and Jourdain later said that she felt an overwhelming sense of dread as they passed him. Finally, they arrived at Le Petit Trianon, where they saw a woman sitting on the grass sketching. Moberly later claimed that the woman was Marie Antoinette herself, as she had seen in portraits. The strange feeling of oppression lifted, and soon after the women encountered a party of tourists and returned to their hotel, shaken, but not fully understanding what had just happened. It wasn't until some time later, when discussing the event, that Moberly and Jourdain began to consider that they might have experienced something extraordinary. They researched the history of Versailles and discovered that many of the people and the scenes they described closely matched those from the 18th century, particularly around the time of the French Revolution. The bridge, the old-fashioned clothing, and even the appearance of Le Petit Trianon had all seemingly been as they were in the late 1700s. Moberly and Jourdain came to believe they had somehow slipped through time, encountering the ghostly remnants of the past. The women eventually published their account in a book entitled An Adventure under the pseudonyms Elizabeth Morrison and Frances Lamont. The story of their time slip at Versailles became a sensation, sparking debates and investigations. Some dismissed their experience as a shared hallucination or a misinterpretation of historical reenactments, while others found their account compelling and difficult to explain. To this day, the Versailles time slip remains one of the most intriguing and perplexing stories of alleged time travel.
Kingdoms rise and empires crumble, and the knowledge and wisdom from past ages are lost to the foggy ruins of time. But for genuine seekers of truth, one place stands alone on a hill. Shining brightly in the darkness, you, dear listener, have reached the Hidden Citadel.
Hey, welcome to the Hidden Citadel. I'm your host, Willie Minix. I'm with your other host, Greg Kemp. And we're here to talk about all sorts of strange things. But first, off recording, we were talking about Oasis. And I promised Greg I would tell him my Oasis story. So you might not know this, Greg, but I was once in the band Oasis.
I didn't know that.
Yes. So when I was in college, I was sitting in the right outside the econ class, and this girl looks at me and she says, "Aren't you in a band?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "What's your band called?" And I said, "Oasis." And she says, "Wait a minute, I've heard of you guys." And I said, "Really?" because we had only done a few gigs around town, so it's like I didn't know that, you know, we would be known or anything. But I was like, well, that's kind of cool, you know, that she's heard of my band. And then the next week, I hear Don't Look Back in Anger, and I was like, oh, we're going to have to change the name of our band. So I'm sitting in French class. This guy walks in, and he slams his books down on the desk. And I said, dude, what's wrong? And he says, my band has to change its name. And I said, what's the name of your band? And he said, Korn.
Korn, oh.
Yeah, so he had to change
That's
the name
hysterical.
of his band, too. I know. It's funny. So, yeah, I was briefly in Oasis. We had a much better logo than the other Oasis, though. And the funny thing was,
I bet.
our Oasis shtick was we were, like, really heavily influenced by Pet Sounds. And their Oasis shtick was they were very heavily influenced by the Beatles. So
That's
was like...
hysterical.
Yeah. And our Oasis, it actually had the S came up and it turned into a palm tree that covered the O. And the O looked like a pool. You know, it wasn't like just a O. It was shimmery and everything. Wavy.
Oh, like California.
Yeah, so it was
like
much.
The Beach Boys.
Yeah, it was a much better Oasis. I mean, they should have called themselves something like, I don't know, Number 9 Train or something, but
Something from one of the songs.
Something from a Beatles song, yeah. And we had a much better logo. And at the time, I didn't know that you could register band names either. So it was like, man, we had been called Oasis since 1989. So we had them beat by several years, but we just
on many levels.
Yeah, we just didn't know about it. Yeah, maybe. I mean, they do have a couple good songs. I like Waiting for the Rapture, and I like Don't Look Back in Anger. And Wonderwall's okay, but that's about it. I didn't like any of their others. I hated Champagne Supernova. That song, maybe that was the first song that came out. I don't remember, but I just remember being like, man, we got to change our band name.
That's a bummer.
And that's when the Fantastic Flying Frogs actually started. And for those of you who don't know about the Fantastic Flying Frogs, the intro music to our show is the Fantastic Flying Frogs. So you can check them out. Some of the best music,
yeah.
Yeah, you can check them out on Spotify. And we have both been a part of that project, so it's kind of a fun little connection. And tell me about our T-shirts, Greg. By the time this is released, it'll probably be Christmas or getting close to Christmas, so people will definitely want to be getting something for their family members.
Well, I'll tell you. The one thing is, there's a couple things here. First of all, on every T-shirt, we made T-shirts designed by just an amazing T-shirt designer, Willie Minix. You will find one T-shirt for almost every topic we cover, and then some. But not only is it the topic, the depiction, the illustration is insane. It'd be like, I don't know, Rock and Religion or whoever they were. That one company that had cool T-shirts. Or who's that guy? Ed, whatever his name is. Ed with all the flames.
Yep.
And there's just something about it that's got a really cool look to it. It's got Hidden Citadel in the back. In it looks like Indiana Jones font. It's just really cool. Like the whole thing about it. But it's a T-shirt that if I saw in a store, I'd be like, "Wait, what is that?" Like that's how I don't know, vivid and kind of cool the image is. So it's just kind of like,
I'm so happy that you like it that much because I wanted to have the kind of thing that was a T-shirt that I would buy even if I didn't really know much about. Like I've got a T-shirt, it's one of my favorite shirts. I bought it at at a restaurant in Myrtle Beach, and it's called the River City Cafe. And the back of the shirt is a raccoon pirate, and he's got crossed swords, and he's like, surrender the nuts, because the shtick of the restaurant is they always give you peanuts when you go in to eat.
Oh,
and
right.
So I was like, I love that shirt, and I was like, what can I design that would be the kind of shirt that other people would just say, man, I don't even know anything about those guys, but that's just a cool shirt and I want to have it,
Yeah.
So
it's one of those shirts that, we both play in bands. And I was saying that for my gigs, this would be the kind of shirt I'd want to wear for it.
Yeah.
It's something really cool on the front. it doesn't really have. It's very unique, and that's what I like. If I'm wearing something for a concert, or if I'm wearing something for one of our gigs, then it's got to be something kind of unique. That's something that someone looks at and goes, "Wait, what is that?"
Yeah,
that kind of thing. You want something that provokes. So.
And the other thing to say about it, I guess, is the front. I'm calling them the monster series, even though some of them aren't monsters or cryptids or whatever, because we've got Jesus on one of the shirts too. But I'm calling it the monster series shirts. They're those comfort fit shirts where they're like really the cozy material that's supposed to be really, really soft. And they have the depiction on the front and then the logo on the back. And then there's another type of shirt that I'm just putting some of our stills up that are like the placeholders for the videos.
Yeah.
And those are on just like regular tees, and they don't have the QR code or anything or the logo on the back. So they're different types. And then there's also mugs. There's a tote bag. There's some posters, some wall art. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that if you want to support the show, we do now have Patreon that you can support the show that way, or you could support the show by buying a t-shirt. Or another really good thing is just tell your friends, you know, and we long term we're hoping to eventually have books that we can publish that kind of go along with the materials that we talk about on the show. And who knows what else? Maybe even a themed album. No, but the hope is that we'll have plenty of cool materials that people will like. I don't like it when I'm listening to somebody and they're plugging something that when I go and look at it, I'm like, dude, that's embarrassing. I would not want to buy that. You know,
I know.
But I think I'm pretty proud of how they came out, and I'm hoping that the quality is just as good, that you find the quality just as good as it should Hello, be, dear listener. Yes, it's that magical time of year again. You know, the wonderful time of year when everybody is buying presents for each other. But deep down in the depths of your heart, you know that nobody's really going to get you what you want for Christmas. So why don't you do yourself a favor and go buy yourself a couple Hidden Citadel t-shirts, because they're what will really keep you nice and warm and cozy on these winter mornings surrounding Christmas and all the festivities and fellowships. And what could be better than to open up a brand new package that has your name on it, that when you take it out it says the Hidden Citadel. You know it's what you need, and in fact, why don't you go out and get 3 or 4 more for your friends and family, because they don't even know that the Hidden Citadel t-shirt exists. So how could they get it for you anyway? Hey, guess what? The link is down below, and you can go pick up 3 or 4 and share the joy this Christmas. Even a sweatshirt, maybe. I don't know. Do you think I ought to do like the monster series as sweatshirts too?
I think so.
Really?
I think the images are just so cool. Really cool.
Well, maybe I'll do that too, because I know my kids really like hooded sweatshirts, which I don't understand because we live in North Carolina and it's hot all the time. So I'm just like, why are you walking around in a sweatshirt? But it's the cool thing, so... You know, so they walk around in sweatshirts anyway.
And layers of clothes.
Well,
that's what I don't understand.
You and I are both from the Midwest. We should understand that.
Well, no, there's this fashion thing where you wear like a cardigan, and then you put a then you put a sweatshirt over it with a hood. Mm-hmm. And then you put and
there's a t-shirt
like a
in
members
there somewhere.
only jacket, and then you put a members only jacket on top of that.
Yeah.
And then you put like an Army Navy surplus jacket on top of that with a hood.
Yeah. See,
and then you go to a wedding or a funeral and you say I'm dressed up.
Yeah.
I saw it on Big Bang Theory. That's the way like Leonard would dress for stuff.
I'm pretty sure it's a Midwestern thing because I mean, you know, I remember it could be, well, I remember one time my dad was a plumber, and we got called to this job. It was at the first week of June. And I left the house wearing shorts and a t-shirt because I knew we were digging a ditch, and it was like, you're going to get hot, and Dad's going to make me do most of the digging because he'll be in the backhoe.
Yeah.
So we're digging a ditch. Around lunchtime, it starts to get a little cold, and Dad says, it seems like the temperature's dropped a lot. And I said, yeah, I'm starting to get cold. I'm just wearing shorts. Next thing you know, we see snow coming down, and we had to pull up off the job because a snowstorm came in. And it's like, that's just the weather in Indiana. So it's like you kind of dress in layers because you never know if it's going to be hot 1 minute of the day and then snowing a couple hours later. It's just a really weird thing. So I was, growing up, we always wore like a t-shirt, maybe a flannel shirt over top of that, and then some kind of a jacket, and then probably a hat of some sort. And that was just the common way to dress because you knew that you might need all that at some point in the day. So that was sort of, the way that it worked for us. But anyway, let's talk about weird stuff. We are going to... Oh, and I emailed you if you have access to your email. I meant to tell you this ahead of time, and I forgot. Or I can just read it off to you. I emailed a list of 20 of the most famous time slips that have been recorded. And however you want to do it, I could just read it off.
Sure.
And then we could talk about it. Some of them, I sent some videos, or I told you about some places to look at videos earlier this week. And I was going through editing, and actually in 2 different episodes we talked about the time slip that I felt like I encountered in Liverpool. And so if you haven't heard those episodes,
that's right,
you guys can go back and listen to the Liverpool time slip that happened to me. And on one of them I actually included photographs of the statue in question. I don't know what you call it. It wasn't really a statue. It was just a bunch of painted rocks stacked on top of each other. But this, as I was editing it this week and putting the pictures in, I noticed something that I didn't notice before. We knew there was some construction going on the day that we got there. It was actually on my birthday. It was May 14th of 2024. We got to Liverpool, and we walked across to the Albert Dock. And I noticed this place called the Mermaid House because, I really like my band, the Fantastic Flying Frogs, has an aquatic theme. I've got a guitar that's got a mermaid painted on it. It's like that's kind of one of the things. So I thought, oh, this might be a cool picture. So where the statue or sculpture or whatever it is, the big rock thing, is standing. What I found out when I'm looking at the pictures is when we were on the Albert Dock walking into it, you can see the statue above everything in the first couple pictures. But as I get up to it to take the picture of the mermaid in, I'm literally standing, as I'm looking at all the other pictures, I'm standing right next to this statue, but I didn't notice it at all. And my wife was right behind me and she didn't notice it at all. So I take a picture of the Mermaid Inn, and off to the left of the Mermaid Inn, I can see that there's nothing there. It's like there's no scaffolding, there's no anything. But right in front of the walkway onto the Albert Dock, there actually is a scaffolding set up. And so I have a picture of me standing right next to the scaffolding where I take a picture of my wife, and this sculpture would have had to have been within touching distance of where I was standing, and yet I didn't even notice it. Like, I literally, if I had gotten to the same spot the next day, I could have reached out and touched that statue or whatever it was, but I don't remember seeing it there when we got up to it at all. And it's so bright and vivid, it's like, I don't know how you can miss it. And the next day, it was the first thing we saw, and we were like, wait a minute, when did they put this here? And at that point, they had guardrails covering the entire area. And the guy behind the guardrail says, this has been up like this all week long. And I was like, I have a picture that it's not there yesterday. And so all of that is in that other video. And the photos are there, and as best, and it's like, I wish that I had known that I was having some time slip, or I would have taken a picture right there of where the rock thing was, but I don't have anything. I don't really have a picture of that. I wish I did, because it's so easy to disprove and say, okay, well, maybe you had more of a mental blank, but I don't know how two people observing the same thing can have. I mean, there is folie à deux, that is the two people.
Yeah,
but isn't that usually that one person is convincing the other person of something that's not really there? Isn't that how that works?
Yeah, so shared psychotic disorder, and yeah, you usually have one person who's the proselytizer and one who's the acolyte. Yeah.
Yeah, but my wife and I were both totally confused by the whole thing, and I don't think that this scenario necessarily is an example of folie à deux.
No, it's not. But I'll tell you, let's look at this, though, because it's interesting. I was looking through and you should go through, maybe read off some of those, I examples of time slips. But you know what? It's funny because I think part of Hidden Citadel is to react with awe and with interest, curiosity, whatever it is, be awestruck and, just be almost enamored with things that are just outside of the normal, supernatural, the odd, that kind of thing. But also to examine things and say, all right, what else could we call this? In the same way you just did it. In the same way you just did, you said it's folie à deux, which is French for the folly of two. Or but the actual diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders and psychology, it'd be called shared psychotic disorder. But you can, if you rename it, sometimes it gives you a little different picture of what it is. If I said shared psychotic disorder to somebody, and I was talking about a husband and a wife, that they might be a little offended. If I say, well, the French used to call it folie à deux, and it just means that at the time you both, and the word folly usually is silliness, it can be oddness, it can be playing around, it's a lighter texture to it.
Right.
It's a little bit better feel. So what we do with Hidden Citadel, though, is looking at time slips. When we see this happening, I don't think we're seeing fiction. I think the two things, usually it's almost backward prophecy, almost backward vision.
Oh, that's an interesting way of putting it.
So, like, we could call it noisive, which is vision backwards. So it's like when in scripture, when God gives a vision, this is what's going to happen. It is going to happen, and it happens exactly the way He says it. Right. So it is the event in real time, and then a picture of what's happening in the future time, right?
Yep.
So time slips appear to be that where you are is in real time, but you also giving a glimpse and an experience in the same way the prophets did, because a lot of times they would, in their prophecy, they would experience 5 senses at least.
Yeah.
Of
and they
what
would talk
was going
about
on,
that.
right?
I used to have an experience when I was young. And I don't want to call it deja vu because it was similar to deja vu, but it was different enough that I'll describe it to you. I would have a dream, and in my dream, maybe like just one in particular I remember, my grandmother was baking a pie, and she was saying what she was saying in the moment, and I was responding, and then like 3 or 4 days later, I'm at my grandma's house. She tells us, hey, boys, why don't you guys go collect some raspberries and I'll make you a pie. So we went out, we got the raspberries, we come back in, I'm sitting at the table while Grandma's making the pie, and then all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, I had this dream like 3 or 4 days ago, and Grandma's going to say X, Y, and Z, and then I'm going to respond, And then she said exactly what I had in the dream, and then I responded exactly the way I did in the dream, and then all of a sudden it was done. And this happened to me all the time, from probably the time I was like 5 or 6 up until maybe I was like 13 or 14, and it was something that happened to me on a pretty regular basis, at least maybe once a month or once every other month. This would happen. I don't know what that is, and it's not the way that, because I've had deja vu too, where it's like that weird feeling of, wait a minute, haven't I done this before?
Or had a dream about it. Yeah.
But this I could pinpoint. I remember specifically having this dream at this time, and now it's happening.
Well, I got to tell you, unfortunately, this one is very familiar to a lot of people, because raspberry is the finest of the flavors, and pie is one of the finest desserts. So we've all had a dream about. We've also all had a dream about a raspberry pie, and everything that goes into the making and the enjoying of it. So that was a tough one for me to say. That's unique, Willie.
It has its own psychological issue.
That's right. But there's two things that I see that jump out to me. One is that understanding what time is as kind of a literal construct which doesn't go away. So does it exist for the entirety? So in other words, the time we have now is in existence. It will not disappear tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is here, and we talked about this before when Jesus says, "You'll be with me today in paradise."
Yep.
Or he says to the apostles, "You will not perish before you will see the kingdom."
Yeah.
Now, in linear time, the linear derivation of time, it's like, how does that work? But if you're looking at dimensionality, if you're looking at the way layers could work, the way a swirling or a helix could work, they could all be on the same event, because they just are almost like different floors, are accessible almost in the same moment, because maybe time and space are finite. And there's just, we're all, right now we're in the presence, the past, and the future. Right now, we just have no access to it.
Well, here's something.
Well, let me get to the second one. So the second one is omniscience. We're all living in omniscience. If we're all living in what is being all-knowing, then everything exists within that. Okay, so it means that we're having access to visions and knowledge and experiences from within omniscience. It's all, you could theorize it could be accessible in some way, or there could be an overlap. And where we would get that would be in several instances in Scripture, from Enoch to Simon, or for different places, Transfiguration, the different things where there's an insertion from outside of time or within time of beings, of humans, of different things, of prophecy. Usually the prophecy is for, but in what it appears to be here is that the experience is all of a sudden an experience of what was there before, what was there a long time ago, what was there years before, and I wonder if your experience was either the way what that statue, the statue and the was the guardrail, that whole thing. I wonder if that was in place when they built it.
Maybe.
And so that was all there, and then you get there, and you're looking at the finished product that's been there for years. Or maybe yours is a vision of what it will look like in 50 years or something.
Who knows?
You go back, and there, there's everything.
Maybe if somebody is listening who's from the Liverpool area, maybe they can give us more information about what that rock sculpture actually is. I would love to know more, like when it was put there. Was it there when the Beatles lived there? I mean, there's just all sorts of questions. But one of the things that I wanted to mention, too, is I read an article a while back about how they were talking about belief and how these neuroscientists kind of have narrowed down that people that are believers seem to all have this certain part of their brain that is common amongst everybody who is like a belief gene or something. It's not really a gene, but it's like a belief portion of the brain that lets them believe. And I'm wondering, well, two things, I guess that raises two questions. Number one, do these experiences happen because believers have, and I'm not talking about just like believers in Jesus, but I'm talking about like people that just believe stuff in general. Like it's easy for them to believe, oh, maybe that could be a possibility. Like odd things that we're talking about. There are some people out there that, like, you could put Bigfoot right in their living room and they'd be like, I don't believe in Bigfoot. That's just some guy. And, you know, they're just contrarians no matter what. They don't believe in anything. And yet there's other people that it's like, oh, you say fairies abducted you and took you to Mars and painted your car red? Yeah, I could believe that happened. You know,
Yeah.
it's like there are people that will believe anything. I've always felt myself as being more of a skeptic, which is why I'm into magic tricks, and it's why I'm an apologist, because I didn't jump into Christianity without investigating everything else. It was like I needed to know, especially if my salvation, my eternal life or non-life or whatever rests on the claims of this guy named Jesus. I want to make sure that what he's saying lines up and that everything about his life makes sense to me. And that's why, as a pastor, I think a lot of my parishioners over the years liked me because they felt free or safe asking me any kind of question. Like, I remember one guy saying, my dad's really into the ancient aliens thing. You know, what can you tell me about aliens? And I was like, at the time, I was like, well, I don't know a whole lot about that, but I'll investigate it and I'll get back to you. And I did, you know, and it's like other people ask me questions about, how does the end times work? Is Tim LaHaye right with all this Left Behind stuff? And I was like, well, I don't know. Let me investigate it. And when I dug into the Bible, I came away saying, gosh, this Tim LaHaye stuff is an outright lie. It's not at all what's in the Bible, you know? Yeah. And so it's kind of like, and then I ended up writing a book about it, which my book was really just an email. It started as an email to this person's question about, you know, what do we know about the end times?
Sure.
You know? And so basically, I say that to say, or to ask, what do you think about the idea of, if there is a belief portion of the brain, is it the belief portion that's coming after the weird experiences that I have had or that people have had, or do the weird experiences come after the belief portion develops in the brain, or, you know, which came first, I guess, or what do you think?
Well, so it's interesting because, and you know, I've never thought about it until right now, until you just, you know, went through that. But there's, generally speaking, it seems like there's two kinds of people here that we're talking about. The ones that have an automaticity of seeing the probability for anything and really enjoying anything that has to do with mysticism or supernatural or anything like that. I don't think that's who we're talking about right now. I don't think they would measure anything on those
Individuals,
those neurological scales, because they're not. They are just enjoying the wonderment for the sake of wonderment. I think what's here is those who are kind of searching and searching, and then they find, and after they find, they discover that what they thought was finite in their understanding of things has another level. And, you know, in Scripture you talk about that when their eyes were opened, right? When they're baptized in the Spirit, or the scales fell off their eyes. Well, how does our brain develop? Which comes first? Well, generally speaking, your brain is developed by how your experiences, your sensory system experiences, and we know that because if you were to take this would be a horrible concept, but a living person, you would keep them alive and keep them in a box, shut down, completely sensorial, shut down. What would happen to their cognition? Their cognition would probably be very low.
That's how I was raised.
Yeah. Well, you're the exception. You're the exception to the rule. But there would be an intellectual disability because of a lack of sensory experience that is allowing the brain to develop. Okay. So follow me here. So if the Scripture then points to what faith is the evidence of things unseen. All right, so they're unseen, but they're still experienced. but they're talking about unseen. Unseen is part of the occipital lobe and a part of the entire neurological experience of perception. It's one of the actually, we have 5 senses, really. That we have 7 to 8 senses. There's vestibular, and there's there's the, I can't think of the other one. The one with your proprioception. Proprioception is the other.
Is that kind of like umami? The taste?
No, it's not the 5th flavor. No. But anyway, if we are, it's talking about a sensory experience, but it talks about seeing without seeing, understanding without knowing. Hope is one of the most bizarre things you could really talk about, because that is anticipating something, an outcome, with such dedication to it that it changes your life in a way that you are reacting on a constant basis, on a regular basis, and steering your ship in direction of whatever that notion is. But in order to do that, you have to have neurological flow, rhythm, firing. Your dendrites expand. Your neurotransmitters. You have a neurogenesis of sorts, which is the making of new and neuroplasticity. Both of those things are occurring. Well, if you are operating in a way that you are not doing things based on sight and sound, but a certain kind of belief, and yet you are still thinking, well, of course, your brain would develop something as a part of that. There has to be evidence of that neurologically, because you are exercising that at such a high rate and governing the rest of your system based on that. So it makes a lot of sense that there would be another portion that would develop. And I got to tell you, when you have that portion, it's a blessing. When you have that understanding, because guess what that does? It reduces your anxiety. It reduces a lot of these. It reduces the overall executive functioning of your system. Because what's your priority? Your priority is now it's reorganized towards something that has the best possible outcome at the end, and has the best possible method at the beginning. And both of those things, that's your frontal lobe. That's prefrontal cortex that's doing a lot of that. So all that to say, we're really far away from time slips right now. But all that to say,
there. We're getting there.
I'm hoping for segue. Well, all that to say, when you have that, it would make a lot of sense to detect in someone's brain there is a different aspect to how this person is, the way they think. Because that's what we're even taught in Scripture, that you will change the way you think. Well, what is the evidence of that? Your neurology.
Yeah, okay. I would like at some point to explore more about the other senses, because that's kind of a new thing to me. When you mention that we have more than 5 senses, everybody's heard, it's a 6th sense. But the idea of 7 or 8 senses, that was kind of a new concept that I don't know about, which I think that would be a really interesting.
Yeah.
But is that like a really massive thing to diverge down, or can that be summarized real quick?
Well, yeah. So you have a vestibular sense. It's your sense of balance, and it's really, and you can't account for sight, sound, smell, taste, or touch as a result of it. But it's really like in your inner ear, you have these things called cilia, and the cilia are generally perpendicular to the ground you're standing on, and if they move at all, then you have a sense, your vestibular sense no longer allows you balance.
So is that why I can't dance very well?
Probably.
But I'm okay on a boat.
Yeah. And then the second one is proprioception, and that is now in a lot of ways, if you were to take your hands and put them behind your back and touch them, how do you know they're there? How are they able to touch? That's proprioception.
That's the same thing with using weapons in martial arts. How do you really know where the tips of those weapons are? But somehow you know.
Yeah, but in this case, it's your body parts understanding where they are, how they're all connected, how they work together. Yeah, it's interesting though. You see with people though, in groups of people, you can kind of see some people have social proprioception, others don't. They don't know where. Like in an elevator, you go in and you automatically stand in a spot that you know is going to allow you space enough that if someone yawns, sneezes, stretches, still allows you the space. You understand where you are in a group. If you walk in Manhattan sometime, or go ice skating, you're using proprioception that entire time to anticipate where people are going, and people do it.
And that's
successfully all
why
the
I
time.
can't dance.
But is that taste, touch, smell? Is that sight? Is that Is that audition? No, it's not.
Okay.
It's not. So we have at least 7.
Okay.
I think there are others that have
So
been listed that people discuss. But
let me bring in the segue then. Could
Okay.
the time slipping phenomenon be another sense that maybe some people have but other people don't? And how would we verify or test that?
Oh, all right. So yeah, I'm just kind of thinking of it now. But when we say it in Scripture, the heavens declare the glory of God, and if creation itself, is kind of speaks, right? It means that everything created has an aspect to it that shows God's fingerprints in God's existence in a way. And I would say that if we're talking about within time which was created, there are people that believe that time is actually not as much created. That time is an outcome of our own failure. In other words, time is a measurement of something. You have eternity. There's no measurement, right? Mm-hmm. Right. So, but right. Time indicates that there's essentially a limitation of sorts.
Yep.
So when you have, but there are people that see things all the time, and if you say, "Wow," if you look at omniscience, and that all of this occurred then and now, and you're experiencing it. What are you experiencing there? You're experiencing something that is supernatural. And when you start looking at something, and it's not a ghost that you go, well, that may or may not be there.
But here's the thing that I've noticed about looking at some of these time slips, and I'll get into some specific ones in a little bit, but people a lot of times will say, I found myself in this other time period and nobody could see me. Or I found myself in this other time period and I could see everybody and hear everything that was going on, but I couldn't interact with anybody. Or some people would say, well, I found myself in another time period and I could see everything, but I couldn't hear anything. Or other people would say, well, I was in another time period and I could actually talk to people and interact with the other people. And so you talked about the occipital lobe. Either you're being transported into another time, or maybe something's triggering your occipital lobe to see something that was like it's turning your occipital lobe into a projector, or if you will, of what happened in the past in that area by some mechanical function or supernatural function.
Well, that's why I think it's more of like a vision. Instead of a forward vision, it's a backward vision, like noise.
It would be a vision if they didn't interact with people, but the time slips where people interact with other people, I don't know if you can call that a vision. Right.
The only thing is, you have when you even have dreams and you think something feels very real in a dream, and really there's you're interacting. You're not interacting. You are still experiencing sensory information even while you're in a dream. I wonder if the thing that doesn't make any sense to me, and the part I'd be skeptical about, are those who say they interacted with other people, unless they're falling into a character that's already existing there, and those people are having a conversation. Because generally speaking, an insertion, unless we're in the MCU, an insertion of something in the time equation should end up with something different on the other end of the time equation.
So let me give you some. Okay, go ahead.
Well, let me just give what I'm thinking is. All right, so let's say Willie is involved in a time slip, and he's ending up in Tombstone, and he's sitting there, and a guy comes over and says, "I want blood." And Willie goes, "I'm your Huckleberry. Say when." And then comes out of the time slip. And comes back and has this discussion with me. And I think, all right, maybe you went back and assumed, say when.
Say when.
I love that. Say when.
That movie has the best quotes of ever. I
everything.
love it.
So maybe
we have an educated man here.
Yeah.
I hate him.
I hate him. It reminds me of something close to home. Yeah, I hate him.
I hate him.
My hypocrisy only goes so far. I love
I've not yet begun to defile myself.
Oh. Wow, Johnny,
right,
I didn't know we see you there. Wait,
you may go now.
So anyway, what I'm saying is, maybe you went back and you had this time slip, and you were actually in the conversation. Your role was something that had already taken place. In other words, you didn't actually occupy.
Oh, okay.
You didn't occupy any new.
But
there was not a new variable there.
This becomes like a type of possession, though, and that might explain demon possession to a certain extent. Yeah. And speaking of which, one of my students.
How are we spelling which?
Yeah, well,
W-I-T-C-H.
One of my students is a Christian now, but she used to be in the occult, and her husband's ex-husband is a very famous occultist, and she wants to know if she can come on the show. And I told her we need to have you on the show to talk about your experiences, and like she was what was called a horse of the god, where she would let these demons come in and they would speak and all this kind of stuff, and we had a really fascinating conversation about our last show about the occult, and I thought maybe it'd be really cool to get her to come on and talk about. She really knows an awful lot about it. And definitely. She was a psychological nurse at a insane asylum for a long time, so you guys probably would have a lot to talk about anyway. So
I like the idea. I want to hear. I want him to be called the Hex Husband. I think it'd be
the Hex Husband. That's more like it. Okay, but anyway, let's talk about some time slips. So that might be next week if you're cool with it.
Sure.
So I might see if we could get her on. But tomorrow we're going to record the show about mermaids. So that'll be a fun topic too.
Wow.
It'll be good. Anyway, here's the first one, the Versailles time slip of 1901. Mm-hmm. It was located in Versailles, France. And two English women, Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, claimed they visited the Palace of Versailles and found themselves in the 18th century encountering Marie Antoinette and other historical figures. In this one, I specifically remember them talking to the gardener, and the gardener being annoyed that somehow English people had gotten in to the gardens and he didn't really want them there, so he shooed them away. Mm-hmm. And then they ran into Marie Antoinette. This is actually one of the most famous and verified, I guess, time slip stories that it kind of seems to have started a lot of it.
Yeah.
But then
does it seem like it happens in pairs? Does it seem like it happens in pairs?
There does seem to be a lot of people that experience this, 2 or 3 people. Like there's been a time slip where there were 4 people in a car and they slipped into the 1950s, but they were actually in the 80s or something. There are some that it's just one person. Sometimes the time slips happen while driving. Seems to be most of them happen while walking. But the other thing too is I kind of wonder if certain things like the disappearance of the 9th Legion, the Roman Legion that just disappeared, what if that was a time slip that went bad and they just disappeared and didn't show back up?
Yeah, or the Bermuda Triangle could be just a very one. Could be an area that it just occurs.
So another famous area that weird stuff happens is on Bold Street in Liverpool, and my time slip wasn't on Bold Street. It was at the Royal Albert Dock, but it wasn't too far away from Bold Street. So there are multiple accounts where people describe stepping onto Bold Street and then immediately finding themselves in a different decade, maybe the 1950s or the 60s, or some of them back in Victorian times. There's one guy that he talked about, this guy actually was homeless and he was really having a hard time, and he had a time slip where he ended up almost being arrested by a Victorian bobby and almost getting robbed by some guys. And I wonder, well, he's homeless, maybe, and he even talks about how he was an alcoholic at the time.
Yeah.
But subsequently he got his life cleaned up after that event because it scared him, to go get sober.
How do they come back? Like how and when do they come back?
There's not a mechanism. It's just sometimes it lasts for 30 seconds. Sometimes it lasts for an hour. There are several time slip stories where the mom is freaking out because she can't find her kid. And the kid is like, I was walking across the street and all of a sudden I was in a different time period for like 10 seconds. And then the mom's like, you've been gone for 3 hours and we've been looking for you. You know?
Yeah.
Which goes back to the whole fairy thing about how they take people away and then years have gone by. Yeah. There's something really strange about this.
Or quantum.
Quantum, yeah.
When we're looking at quantum, too, I mean, I think everything goes back to the MCU right now because it's just...
Yeah, right.
but really, what they, in that, they're like, he's gone for 5 seconds, but he can stay wherever he is for as long as he wants. Yeah. When he comes back, the time him coming back will be after 5 seconds no matter what, even if he's there a lifetime.
There are old stories that we wouldn't consider a time slip, but that maybe we should, like the story of Thomas the Rhymer, which is an old child ballad, but he was a real person. Mm-hmm. And Thomas the Rhymer basically met the Queen of the Fairies, and she took him off to Fairyland, and he lived there for several years. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just a day. I can't remember the story. But anyway, when he came back, all this time had passed. And then there's a story about a guy that he was taken by the fairy queen in Ireland. And when he came, he wanted to go back and see his family. And she said, I can send you back to see your family, but you can't get off your horse, because if you get off your horse, you'll go back to you'll die. So basically, he goes back to where his family's from, and he sees a guy struggling with his plow and is stuck in the mud. And he said, "Look, let's hook it to my horse and we'll pull it out." And in the process, he fell off the horse, and then he immediately died and aged like 300 years, and like the dude in the Holy Grail, like in a matter of seconds.
Wow.
And that was one of the tales that I encountered when I was looking. And I'm like, well, maybe that's a type of a time slip too, but just like a really... And there are a lot of those kind of stories in the ancient times,
Wait a minute.
We don't normally call them time slips.
No, but we're trying to kind of give some... Look at other variables which could be associated with this. All right. So, what our normal concept of time, in a linear sense, in its unwinding and its inevitable finiteness and finality and whatever. Then you look at that and you go, all right, do we know of anything where it's a day, or it's a very slow time, like is in two perspectives. One, it could be like a day to someone, another could be 1,000 years.
Yeah,
now,
right.
To God, though, we know that to God a day is like 1,000 years, but God really doesn't have. He's not governed or corralled or limited by time. Right. But what that means is that in our perception of who God is, or in our finite sensory, whatever it is, finite experience, in reflecting on God, it could be 1,000 years to a day to 1,000 years, which means where in eternity, or to someone with omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence, when it's unlimited what the capacity could be, although in one like in our experience, wow, that's like 1,000 years. This is just a day, and that's mm-hmm. what you just described with the fairies. That's
true.
What Bruce Banner describes in the quantum. Well, it's kind of a cool depiction, because when he tells Captain America, "You're gonna go put the stones back," and the Falcon says, "How long is he gonna be gone?" He said 5 seconds, but he can do whatever he wants for his whole. And it turns out he put the stones back, lived his whole life, came back as an old man, and then when he came back in the 5 seconds. But you got to think, okay, in one perception it's 5 seconds, to another it was an entire lifetime.
Yeah,
which was like 70 something years. And that the idea is not from God. God's not limited by it, but can there be an equation where time becomes not disorganized,
Well,
but
this is why-
misunderstood, misperceived.
This is why when Jesus said, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, said blah, 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 and he quotes something Enoch says in the book of Enoch.
Yeah.
Now, Heiser, and I know we defer to Heiser, but I might possibly disagree with him on this.
Easy.
Heiser says,
Easy.
I know, it's hard.
Put on your seatbelt.
Heiser says that when Jesus said Enoch is saying this and such, he's basically saying it the same way that we would quote a book by Stephen King and say, well, King says this.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, well, it wasn't King that said it. It was the character Randall Flagg that said it in The Stand, but Stephen King wrote it.
Yeah.
And so because the book is called the Book of Enoch, Jesus is just saying Enoch said this, referring to the Book of Enoch. However, if Enoch was one of these time slip kind of things, what's to say that he didn't come back at 400 BC or sometime during the Qumran era, right before Jesus was born, and write the Book of Enoch?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I don't think we can discount that necessarily. Maybe it was Enoch, or maybe it was Enoch came back at some point, because obviously he had to have come back to write this book for us to have it, you know? And so at some point he writes this book, and then maybe by the time the scribes get a hold of it in the years before Jesus, and they add it to the Qumran library, maybe they're working through the remnants of what they had that Enoch left for them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's interesting because you remember in Lion King, he's like, you know my father? He goes, I know your father?
Yeah.
Where, you know, it's like, and then, you know, we have tell him the I am sent you. Like Jesus makes a case about I can't remember, talked about who is, not who was, but who is.
Oh, yeah, Abraham. And he says, I'm a God of the living. And before Abraham was, I am.
I am. And it's just, there's a sense of there that it's, that the existence of something over time means it still exists. And so where do they occupy space? Like, where is that? And it appears that there's evidence that there's an overlap.
This is why the guys from the Young Earth people, I think they do an amazing job at showing that Noah's Ark was a real thing, that the global flood was a real thing, that everything happened around a certain time period. But they don't have me convinced in a Young Earth at all, because they really, all the information's obliterated by the flood. I mean, everything was pretty much wiped out. And the only thing that I've ever heard a Young Earther say that really made sense is you can't have pollinators on one day and flowers on another day and have a mass amount of time, like 1,000 years between them. And I'm like, okay, that makes some sense. I do kind of understand that. But other than that, I'm like, I don't know. It could have taken forever, for all I know, to say, let there be light. I mean, just in that one thing before the day happened, that could have been a massive amount of time. So I'm not hurting either way, and I know that some people would kick me out of their church for saying that, but I just don't know. You know, it's like, anyway.
Yeah,
back
it's interesting.
To some of
also
the times,
says God. Well, it's still time here because it seems like that's the theme, but. You know, God planted the garden. Yeah, that's what it says. It doesn't say he just raised it up.
Spoke and there
are
was.
things that I think it's the difference between bara. There's two different words I think for create. One of them is bara, and the other, I can't remember what the other one is. But like, one is that it almost ex nihilo, out of nothing. Yeah. The other one is it allowed it to develop over time and grow. So planting a garden, planting his garden.
In the Greek, it's that kairos and chronos, where one is they're two different types of time, you know, and I think the Hebrew has the same kind of a thing where you've got two different types of time, where one is over a course of a vast period of time, and one is in the course of moments. And then there's also yom, the idea of the word day can also mean era, can mean epoch. It can mean all sorts of things. So it's hard to pinpoint that. Okay, Now another very famous time slip is called the Vanishing Hotel of 1979. This one is Montélimar, France, where two English couples stayed at a rustic old-fashioned hotel in France, and upon returning they couldn't find the hotel again, and when they got their film developed, all of the pictures that they took of the hotel didn't come out.
Wow.
And also when they paid for the hotel, it was like, I don't know, comparable to like, here's 2 francs when it should have been like 30 francs or something like that. And they had like old-fashioned policemen came into the hotel, and when they went back the next year to find this place, they were told that was tore down in like right before World War II or something like that. So, and that was 4 people that experienced that one. And then there was a pilot, Sir Victor Goddard, in 1935. He actually had a time slip forward to, I think it was the 50s, where he's flying over this area of an airfield where they were thinking about putting an airfield, and he's doing an aerial survey, and all of a sudden, the whole thing laid out in front of him is yellow training planes and mechanics with different insignia in a blue uniform, whereas at the time, the insignia was different, and they wore a brown uniform. The RAF did, and he saw this, and then years later, in the 50s, when it finally came about, he was like, oh my goodness, who would have thought that they would have yellow training planes, but then there they are, and who would have thought that they would change the uniform to blue, but here it is, it's blue. And he wrote a book about it, and he was a knight. I mean, he had been knighted. This guy wasn't some quack, although Elton John's a knight too, so it's hard to... Anyway, I digress. But, he was at a time period where becoming a knight actually meant something, I think.
Yeah, I know. I have just a bunch of Elton John songs in my head now, but I
love Elton John.
The Circle of Life. That's what we're talking about here. So he summed it up with the Circle of Life.
And you do know who wrote the background vocals for that song, right? It was Andre Crouch.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, so you got Elton John and Andre. There's two really a good combo there.
It is a good combo.
So that was in 1935.
Yeah.
Then we've got it's called The Phantom Road, and this is in Tunbridge Wells, UK. It is weird that a lot of these happen in England, but so do a lot of ghost sightings too. A couple driving near Tunbridge Wells reported suddenly finding themselves on an old-fashioned cobblestone road with Victorian-era carriages, and after a few moments they were back on the modern road. And then in 1953 in York, UK, a plumber was working in the basement of a treasurer's house in York, and he saw a group of Roman soldiers marching through the wall, and the details of their uniforms match what was later confirmed to be accurate for Roman soldiers of that were stationed in that area.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an odd thing. The time slip at the Pembrokeshire house in 1988 was in Wales, and a family in that town reported experiencing a time slip where they saw their house and surroundings as it would have been centuries earlier, complete with people dressed in old-fashioned clothing. And this reminds me of one that I listened to as we were studying for this, about a little girl who she went out of her bedroom and she wanted to go downstairs, but she always needed help because the stairs were too steep for her. And there was a door in the wall that she said was never there before. And a lady in a maid's outfit came out and said, "What are you doing here?" And she says, "I just wanted to go downstairs." And the maid said, "Okay, I'll help you." And so she helps her downstairs. And when she gets down there, the mom says, "What are you doing down here, and how did you get here?" And she said, "Well, the lady helped me." And she turned around and the lady was gone. And when they took her back up the stairs, the door was gone. But what they found out later was that there was a door in the wall, and it was plastered over, and it had led to the other, I guess there was another apartment on the other side, but way back in the Victorian times, that had actually been a door into just another part of the house.
Wow. Yeah, it makes you start thinking what we, that we talked about in another episode, just the idea of ghosts. And that if you were to kind of try to synthesize everything that we're saying today, you're almost looking at it's all time slips. And that
maybe
the appearance of somebody, right? And that, think about if you're standing there in the 18th century, whatever, and someone shows up, and you're like, "What is that person?" And then they disappear.
You would
go
think
home and
they're
say,
a ghost.
I just saw a ghost. But the people from the future, going into the past, are like, "Oh yeah, time slip." But it's like,
yeah. But and the people in the past might record it, because I read about another case where a group of monks in, I think it was Italy, recorded seeing an iron beast rolling into the town on wheels with belching black smoke out of the top of it. And basically the way they described it was a steam locomotive. And then the same thing happened, the same area. Years later, a locomotive actually disappeared for a certain amount of time, and everybody's like, wait a minute, where'd the train go? And then it showed up again further down the track. And so now they have a documentation of a time slip where in the present, which is the past now, but in the present, this locomotive disappeared, but they found a record of it appearing in the 1400s or something, in this book that they had. Now, we're talking about stuff that I haven't personally verified, so I don't know, but if that's the true account, that's a pretty interesting one. But I wanted to ask you too. Go ahead. No,
I was just going to say, with all that we're doing here, we're taking a number of either accounts, stories, evidences, whatever it is, and trying to look at the different perspectives on it. It's hard to really draw certain conclusions, absolutes on them, but to look at the variables of what all this could mean. So go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask you, are there any conditions or psychoses or whatever that might be related to this that we could say, oh yeah, we can rule this out, this is definitely a such and such disorder?
Yeah. So there's two things. There's one called, I think we talked about it before, something called pareidolia. And pareidolia comes from the two words. Para means against or alongside, or, a parachute is something that stops the chute. The chute is where you're plummeting. And the para is an alternative to the chute, which is alternative to you plummeting and dying, going flat, right? So the parachute allows an alternative, right? So pareidolia, though, idolia is from the word image, and it's alternate image of something. So it's like when you see something like the face on the moon, or something where it's an image that you're seeing, and you're perceiving something that really isn't there, but your brain is creating an incongruity resolve. These things have come together, and I've placed them and made it something familiar, and now I believe it to be true. So you have pareidolia, and that's all. But that's based on image, because the word ideum, all that eidetic, all that stuff is in the second part of the word. So that has to do with visual perception. The other word is apophenia, and apophenia is tying together. And I think we do a very inbounds and legal amount on this show in a fun way, and that is creating a synthesis or bridge between two very unrelated things. And it's, if you take it to the point where you are believing it, that it's changing your life, and you're trying to get other people to believe something, kind of desperate conviction and stuff, that's where you kind of get in a problem. But apophenia,
well, we are, because now we're trying to sell them T-shirts, and
yeah. So maybe we do have it. But apophenia
we've crossed the line, Greg. We've crossed the line.
Apophenia, you're going to find in schizophrenia. You're going to find in hebephrenia. You're going to find in a lot of the
what you've mentioned that before. What is hebephrenia?
Yeah, it's Hebe. Aphrenia.
Oh,
And
hebephrenia.
it's a type of, it's a part of schizophrenia, and it's a lower level, kind of less.
But you can't have 4 schizophrenics in a car. Like, that's illegal, right?
I think the legal limit is 3. At least
okay.
somebody there has to be, at least,
So, but
has to.
I mean, these families that are saying, these families that are saying, hey, all 4 of us experienced, or my wife and I, we both experienced this weird thing that happened to us. We don't know how to explain it. Is there something that you could point to and say, you might want to go get this checked? Like, if somebody's having a time slip or they're convinced that they had it, how would they know that they're not nuts? You know?
Well, I mean, generally speaking,
I mean, that may not be PC to say that they're, but then again, hasn't the APA discredited themselves enough in this day and age that I should be allowed to do that?
Oh yeah. If you feel
that's
like
kind of,
I
decided that's my new thing. I'm going to throw it into everything. Hasn't the APA discredited themselves enough?
Yeah. I mean, there's really no DSM anymore. There really shouldn't be. But let's see, where were we with that? So there's a couple things. One is that
who knows, man?
Apophenia is basically synthesizing something that isn't there. They're not making a connection where there's not a connection, and it's verifiable that there's no connection. That's what apophenia is. And you see that you can have that happens in delusion, that happens with mind altering drugs, that happens with obviously any sort of drug that changes, and it is called mind altering, that you have in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that there's a drug use that changes your perception in such a way that creates a distortion that limits your social, your academic, your vocational, all that stuff for a period of 6 months or more, that kind of thing. But let's go to, there's something else. So when you say, well, what if there's more than one person experiencing the same thing? Well, that's where you get kind of like the idea of a witness, and it's somebody else experiencing the same thing when you didn't tell them to, you didn't give them any information, and they just did. Well, that makes things a little bit more verifiable in a way, and go, wait a minute, this doesn't fall into the usual category because this is more than one person. Now, if you're going to talk about the shared psychotic disorder or folia do, that kind of thing is usually that there's a person generating the information and has instilled it into the person as if they've experienced it and made it so either they've accounted for the details internally. In other words, they've owned now what the other person has experienced, or there's something called memory reconstruction, which attorneys sometimes use in like court cases.
Let's true.
Let's say where there's somebody on the stand and they say, "Isn't it true that you smashed the glass and it fell to the?" And they create an imagery of sorts that weren't you just so angry that when you they create something, they kind of rewrite the narrative in such a way that it becomes the person's perspective.
Yeah, my wife and I watch these court shows all the time, and like Dateline or whatever, and we'll see the court case go on, and I'm like, I would be a horrible juror. I really would, because the whole thing is, do you have a reasonable doubt? And it's like, man, I could have a reasonable doubt about just about anything. If somebody's got a pretty persuasive argument, it's like, I'll think through that. I mean, if it's a stupid argument, I might be like, okay, you're stretching, But like if somebody has something that has a little bit of a reasonable, it would be easy for me to be like, well, maybe they did get the wrong person for this crime or something like that. It's a tough thing, because that goes into the whole like the devil thing, where the devil's role was to be the adversary, and the word adversary literally meant like a prosecutor, not even a prosecutor. His job was to ask the questions to make you think. Like that was his original task, was to be like, hey, is this really the correct way to build this rock wall. Is this really the correct way to plant this thing? That's why he was like an instructor, and that's what he was designed for. But he went out and he got pride, and then he asked his question, did God really say that?
Yeah.
Knowing that if I ask this the right way, it's going to make Eve fall, you know? And it's like he abused his power and his position, you know? And I feel like our legal situation in a lot of cases is sort of an abuse of that power.
Yeah, I mean, and asking the searching for truth is one thing, but trying to question so that the truth really has no strength at all, or is variable, so it's no longer truth. It's just an opinion, or a perspective. And, you know,
Well,
the Eden event is very much the God actually say that. Just changing one word created a new narrative, a complete new narrative.
The other thing that I think a lot of people that are into the, what do we call it? Well, I guess there's a little bit of pop psychology, but the paranormal, all this kind of stuff, this whole genre that we base our show on, there's a little bit of the, a whole family experienced this time slip. Who did you interview to get that information? Well, Bob Smith said his whole family had, okay, but did Timmy Smith say that the whole family experienced? Did Mary Smith say the whole family experienced it? All I know is Bob Smith is might be selling his story to the reporters for, you know, an extra, £100, you know, over in England. Maybe the, the Daily, what is their mail, their National Enquirer, that was the Daily Post or something.
Oh, yeah.
That was over there, and it's like maybe they're paying them a lot of money to go on record saying this stuff. I don't know where on YouTube, when you're going down the rabbit trail, or like I did, I searched the top 20 time slips. It doesn't give me on the internet like a way that I can verify any of this stuff. So for all I know, every single one of these could be bunk. But there are people out there that are pretty good investigative journalists that have gone and they come back and say, you know, some of these are pretty well verified. What I typed, I was like, what are the top 20 most verifiable time slips that are reported? And that's where a lot of these, you know, the ones that I got from are supposedly the ones that are the most verifiable.
Right.
But
verifiable meaning that each time they ask or they encounter what the perception was, it doesn't change.
Yeah.
Or there's both when
or there's
both
some kind of
witnesses,
corroborating.
Right, when both witnesses were separated, or you know they haven't backed down from anything that they've stated in the past at various times that stayed consistent.
There's a place that we probably need to talk about sometime called the Bennington Triangle, and apparently it's in Vermont, and there was a group of campers claimed they were transported back in time, seeing the landscape as it might have appeared centuries earlier with no modern structures or roads. That was in 1945, but this Bennington Triangle place has a lot of high strangeness, that kind of people disappearing, people having all sorts of alien encounters and abductions, and
I might have to go visit that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You're not too far. You could go take some pictures.
I might have to go to I'm gonna look that up.
Just don't disappear.
No.
But it's like, this is one of those places that it's an area like Area 51 or the Bermuda Triangle or Mount Shasta or the Skinwalker Ranch, where there's not just one odd thing, but there's an awful lot that kind of goes with it. So it's kind of like we could probably do a whole episode just on that place, and maybe next time I'm up in
I think
area,
we should.
We could just plan a trip.
I might go
head up there.
Yeah, maybe I'll go on location.
Yeah, that would be cool.
It was just kind of like talk about like the Blair Witch trial kind of thing, like or Blair Witch Project, not trial. That was later.
So
later and earlier.
We could really go. Yeah, true. We could really go through an awful lot of other of these, but we're kind of getting short on time. And I want to make sure that you get to go do your band practice. But tomorrow we're going to come back and we're going to record an episode about mermaids. So
Woo!
in the meantime, folks, it'll be a week for you. You can go look up all the information. Here's the thing. We haven't talked about this yet. I would love it if all you folks would go watch other videos, read articles, and just post things in the comments, because
Yes.
you know, that would give us more research avenues that we can kind of go down. And you know, one of these days, if enough people buy t-shirts, then maybe we can like have like a whole team of people that's kind of our team that we consult with on this stuff, and that would be kind of an interesting.
I would love that. That would be
interesting
awesome.
thing.
A cadre.
Yeah.
Yes.
That'd be so cool. And then
All
maybe
right.
we could really get down to the brass tacks. All right. You've been
If we
listening
haven't
to the
already.
Hidden Citadel. Yeah, right. You've been listening to the Hidden Citadel. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please, and if you want to, you can support us on Patreon. You can support us on by buying a T-shirt, or just, you know, when you die, you could, you know, just give us all your money in your will. That would be another really fun thing too.
You might want to edit that one.
Yeah, right. Hey, have a great day, folks.
The watchman replies, morning is coming, but night will soon return.